norms, corporate laws, and marketing. These conferences have been inaugurated by eminent personalities like Salman Khurshid, Sheila Dikshit, and Manish Sisodia. There has always been an overwhelming response from the academicians, researchers, and practitioners from all over the country in these conferences. The conference is designed in a manner where not only the researchers and teachers get an opportunity to present their research papers in three technical sessions, but also get an opportunity to interact with the industry experts in the Industry Academy Interface session. In this session, the experts and practitioners from different corporate fields interact with the academicians and try to identify the gaps in theoretical and practical aspects of business and management. Despite the pandemic, we organized various research workshops and couldn't be stopped from progressing further. Thus, we take pride in organizing and welcome you all to the inaugural session of the International Conference on Business and Management. We hope you will find yourself engaged after attending the various sessions of this conference. Thank you.
Hi, Good morning, everybody.
Morning, sir.
Are
Morning,
you
sir.
able to hear me?
Yeah, you're very much audible.
Okay, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. There was a big problem with the internet over here, so I was trying to log in. I think I'm about half an hour late. I'm really sorry for that. So I'm just going to. I just was able to get in. So give me 2 minutes. I will just pull up my presentation and then we can start. Is that all right?
Well, thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
All right.
Yeah. Okay. I'm so sorry about this.
No issues, sir.
Okay.
No issues.
Yeah.
It's very much
Ma'am, so,
understandable.
sorry, ma'am, so should I start?
Yeah, please.
A very good morning to the Assembly of Dignitaries, respected principals, sir, exemplary faculty members, and the most inquisitive audience. I, Eva Sharma, feel privileged to extend a warm welcome to everyone present on day 2 of discussion forum of the international conference conducted by the Department of Commerce, Shahid Bhagat Singh College, Delhi University. Our esteemed panelists would be presenting on the topic Theorising in Business and Management. International e-conference on advances in business and management intends to provide a platform to disseminate knowledge and share experience in dealing with the advances in the field of business and management between researchers, practitioners, and developers working in and around the world in order to cope up with the ever-changing business environment. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome our speaker, Professor Parsuraman, a distinguished professor of marketing of Miami Herbert Business School, USA. And the moderator of this session, Mohammad Kashif, who is an assistant professor at Gujranwala Institute of Future Technology, the University of Pakistan. We're extremely honored to host such a prominent group. May I now request Dr. Meera Mehta, Department of Commerce, to formally introduce Professor Parsuraman and Mohammad Kashif.
A very good morning, everyone. Respected Principal Sir, Dr. Anil Sadana, my esteemed colleagues, and dear students. It's my privilege to lead you into day 2 of our e-conference, IECBM 2021. Continuing our journey for assimilation of knowledge, we begin this day with the discussion forum. It's very well said that theories are the base of research. The journey of theorizing can guide many researchers and the motivation follows. Let us explore this journey with our panelist, Professor A. Parsuraman. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me immense pleasure in introducing Professor A. Parsuraman, a prominent figure in the field of services marketing, currently serving as Pro-Chancellor Academics at Vijayabhumi University, Greater Mumbai, India, mentor AIM Parsuraman Center for Service Excellence, IFIM Business School, Bangalore, India, Emeritus Professor of Marketing, and James W. McLemore Chair Emeritus, University of Miami. He completed his BTech from IIT Madras, then pursued MBA at IIM Ahmedabad, and he received his PhD from Indiana University in Bloomington. He has a huge body of work which includes more than 100 articles published in prestigious journals. He is widely known for his work on Circle, ESQL, and Technology Readiness Index. In fact, his work on Circle model has become fundamental in the analysis of marketing in the services sector and one of the highest cited marketing papers ever. We welcome you, sir. We also have with us Mr. Mohammad Kashif, Assistant Professor at GIFT University, Pakistan. He has 15 years of full-time teaching experience within Pakistan. He is also a visiting professor in several countries. He has published 56 articles with international journals of repute. He is an associate editor for Asia Pacific Journal of Business Administration and editor South Asian Journal of Marketing. He is the brand ambassador for Emerald Publishing. He will be the moderator for the session. So here's wishing you all a delightful and stimulating discussion on theorizing in business and management. It's over to you, Kashif.
Good morning, good evening.
Kash.
Thank you, Dr. Meera. Thank you, the team at University of Delhi, IECPM, and also warm welcome to all the participants. Dr. Meera, thank you very much for introducing me. I guess there is one more thing which I would like to share, that I am just like one of the students for Professor Parasuraman. In fact, academically, I used to say that we grew up by reading his exemplary contributions in the field of marketing. Me and Aarti, we were discussing it some way that how beneficial his writings were when we were joining the institutions and when we were doing our research and our PhD and other degrees. So anyway, sir, I also would like to welcome you. You have like it's an honor that you joined us. I would like to share just a few aspects of theorizing, and then I will not, spend much of the time over what I have to say. Rather, in fact, the theory building is one of the very important, has become one of the very important tasks on part of the researchers. They have to go through the rigorous process during their doctoral degrees, during their master degrees. Even in fact, they have to keep their focus on that what is to theorize and how to contribute to the existing body of knowledge. And they are facing several challenges as well. Sometimes the challenges of skill, and sometimes the challenges are related to the resource, and also the fashion to bring some shortcuts to life and make the life of people easier to publish and easier to grow in a career. One another perspective is that universities, they are lacking in the funding, and also how to align their PhD programs in a way that can really prepare students and the potential scholars that they are able to develop theories in the future. So I guess this today's session is extremely important in multiple ways. Theorizing is important anyway in business and management, but to listen the perspective of a person who actually did that over the years, I guess, is most important. So we are honored and privileged that we will be able to listen today to one of our living legends of our time, Professor Parasuraman. Sir, over to you. We are looking forward to hear your presentation, and I'm sure that we will benefit of it. Sir, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your kind introductions. And thank you very much, Kashif, for your kind words. It's once again immense pleasure for me to join all of you. And once again, it has never happened to me like this, this kind of a mishap. I was dying desperately to join, but I got delayed. But I'm glad to be here in person finally. So let me start, and then if you need to take a little bit of time at the end, goes beyond. Please not to worry. So we can do that. I apologize, but I will try to keep us within schedule as much as possible. I'm going to try and share my screen now. Let me see if that works. Technology has a mind of its own. So let me see if I can share my screen. Okay, is my screen visible now, or? Okay, let me see.
Yes, sir. It is visible.
Okay, it's visible. Okay,
it is visible.
Very good. Let me see. Go to presentation mode. Okay, so still visible, right?
Yes, yes, sir.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to hide the thumbnail video because it interferes with my slides. 1 second. Okay, I'm titling my talk, Developing Potentially Impactful Knowledge Through Programmatic Research, some personal reflections. So let me just double check again. Both myself and my slides are visible, correct? Kashif?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, it is
Yeah,
visible.
okay, okay, all right. Thank
Yes,
you, I
it is.
apologize.
It is.
Yeah, okay.
It is.
Okay, let me start with a brief overview of my academic history. I got my BTech in mechanical engineering from IIT Madras from 1965 to 1970, and then I got my MBA from IIM Ahmedabad. And then I came to the US to do my PhD, which I obtained from Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana. So that's my doctoral, up to my doctoral graduation and my academic career. Then my first academic job was at the University of Northern Iowa in Cedar Falls, Iowa. So I was there for 4 years. And then for a stretch of about 15 years, I was at Texas A&M University, following which I moved to the University of Miami, where I was until recently, a couple of years ago. I was at the University of Miami for 25 years. And then starting in 2019 up to the present time, I'm pro-chancellor at Vijay Bhumi University. So that's my that's an overview of my academic career. And what I would like to do today is basically provide an overview of my career and the evolution of my research. Provide an overall pictorial view of my research and my career, and then focus on sort of like a 15-year slice of my research career, just to make a few points about how to do programmatic, what I would call programmatic research, and why it's important to do so. And then I want to conclude by talking about some of the personal lessons I've learned, and also provide some suggestions for doing impactful research. So going back to the evolution of my research domains, I did my dissertation in the area of, not in the area of service, for which I think most of you know me, but in the area of sales management and industrial marketing. So I completed my dissertation at Indiana University, working on some problems relating to optimally allocating salespeople to sales territories. It was like a combination of marketing and operations research, which kind of leveraged my strengths as an engineer coming from IIT Madras, and also working on marketing problems that have managerial relevance. So I was also simultaneously interested in the whole area of marketing concept that in the late 70s was becoming extremely important. Marketing concept simply means marketers have to take the customer's viewpoint, develop products and services to satisfy those needs of customers, and then try to earn a profit by doing so. So that's basically the marketing concept. So those are my initial areas of research. Then my initial publications were all focused on sales management and industrial marketing. Then when I went to Texas A&M University, I also got interested in services marketing and service quality. Services marketing and service quality. And and at this juncture, I would like to also acknowledge the contributions of my two co-researchers in this area of services marketing and service quality, co-researchers whom most of you, I'm sure, are familiar with. Those are Professor Len Berry, who's still a professor at Texas A&M University, and Professor Valerie Zeithamel, who also worked with me, but recently retired from the University of North Carolina. And then I also had a continuing interest in research methodology and developing scales. And then in the latter part of my career, in terms of the overall evolution of a research stream, I continued to focus on services marketing and service quality. And if you'll notice, in the last of these three different phases, so to speak, right now, most of my research is focused directly or indirectly on services. So if you look at services marketing and service quality, then you have, role of technology in service delivery. That's my current research area. And I continue to be interested in research methodology and scale development related to issues that focus on quality of service. So this is, again, a very broad-based overview of my research evolution. Now I'll switch over to talking about the importance and potential impact of doing programmatic research. Before I do that, if I can just, let's 1 second. Okay, there seems to be a little bit of problem with my computer. Just give me 1 minute. Let me fix this, please. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We can hear
Okay,
you.
so I'll just try to fix this really soon. Something bizarre is happening here. 1 second.
Okay, no problem, sir.
Okay, my apologies again. I think I managed to fix it. Let me see. Okay,
Sure, sir.
my slide is still visible, right?
Yes, sir. It is visible. It is
Okay,
visible.
okay. Thank you. So we can
Welcome.
we can continue.
Sure, sir.
Okay, so let me provide you with an overview of the so-called Parasuraman Zaitamo Berry service research journey. Okay, let me see. Okay, so starting with the left-hand side of the slide here. So my initial focus, as I said, was in sales management and industrial marketing. So that was my doctoral research domain. Valerie Zaitamo, the Z part of the PZ, or PZ as they say in India, PZ team. The Z part is Valerie Zaitamo, and her focus was on, for her PhD, was on price, quality, and value relationships. And then Len Berry, his main focus in those days was on financial services and relationship marketing. So the three of us got together at Texas A&M. We all arrived at Texas A&M around 1980. And then in 1981, we approached the Marketing Science Institute. Some of you may have heard of the Marketing Science Institute.
Yes.
For those of you that have not heard of the Marketing Science Institute, it is a nonprofit organization sponsored by about 75 or so, 75 or so Fortune 500 companies. And the basic mission of the Marketing Science Institute is to identify topics that are of major interest to practitioners or managers, and then get academics like myself to conduct research on those topics to develop new ideas and so forth. So major one of the major topics of keen interest in the late 1970s, early 1980s was quality of service. So the three of us put together a seed money proposal to get some funding and some support from the Marketing Science Institute to start studying this whole area of quality of service. I'm spending a couple of minutes here to emphasize this because how do research ideas develop is a key issue that many of you might be interested in. In my case, the research idea developed because there was a major need out in the industry, out in the business world, about how exactly to understand, measure, and improve quality of service. There was a lot of talk in the business domain so far at that time in the practitioner world that had to do with customer satisfaction and quality of service, but there was very little in the literature. In fact, I would say prior to the 1980s, there was no services marketing as a separate domain within marketing. Most of marketing basically focused on physical products, things that can be manufactured and sold. How to market a can of soup or a computer or a car was the main focus. Was the main focus of most of the marketing literature. So services marketing was something very, very new, very, very new. And this was an opportunity for me to get involved in this new area, even though it had nothing to do with my dissertation topic. So I decided to make the switch and got interested in the whole domain of services, in particular quality of service, which was one of the topmost priorities in those times of the Marketing Science Institute. So the PZ or PZB team, we as a team were together for about 15 years. And that is the 15-year slice that I'm going to focus on for the most part in my talk. But then to give you the full picture of okay, now on my screen, I keep getting messages to admit people. I don't know why I'm getting that message, but it has disappeared now. But if I do get a message to admit somebody to the conference, I guess I should just admit, right? Right?
Sir,
Yeah.
so sorry, sir, but we'll do the same, sir. We'll admit people.
Okay. So
Yes,
I didn't know why it was popping up
yes, sir.
on my.
It just pops up on your screen, but don't worry, sir. We'll take care of that.
Okay. All right.
Thank you so
Okay.
much, sir.
No problem. Okay. Okay. So the PCB team remained as a team for 15 years. So that's the slice that I'm going to focus on. But the P and the Z part, Valerie, Zaitamil, and myself continued our work beyond 1994 on what's called ESQ or eCirQual, as some people call it. So we did a lot of work in the area of electronic service quality. Len Berry, the third co-author on the team, he kind of branched off, and to this day, he has been working on healthcare related services. And then I myself have been working on technology-based services, continue to work in that area. And Valerie, whatever little work that she does these days, is focused on what she calls service infusion in manufacturing companies. Now, if you look at the big picture here in terms of our three research areas, all of our ongoing research of myself, of Professor Saitamo and Professor Berry, all of those are service focused. On the broad domain of service focus, although we are looking at continuing to look at different aspects of it. This again is a trait or a characteristic of what I would call programmatic research. I would also like to, at this juncture, make a distinction between programmatic research and what I would call opportunistic research. Opportunistic research is research that you get involved in because there is a current opportunity to work with somebody, or there's a data set available, and you are well versed with the technique, so you kind of jump on the topic and try to do some research and get a couple of publications out. So that's opportunistic research. Whereas programmatic research is research that consists again of different research studies, but all of them focusing on a major topic domain. So that over the years, even though there are different publications being produced by the same researcher or by the same research team, they all relate to the same broad topic area or broad domain. So that is something that's quite important as well. Okay, now I'm going to focus just on the 15-year slice that I mentioned. That 15-year slice actually consisted of five major phases of research. On this slide, I will just provide an overview of the five major phases, and then in the next few slides, I will provide a little bit of elaboration on each of those phases. So the first phase was purely qualitative research. That had to do with getting a basic understanding what service quality is and what are some of the things that can hinder the delivery of excellent service. And in fact, this is the first phase of our research, which spanned about 2 to 3 years, that produced the so-called GAPS model. I think most of you are familiar with maybe familiar with the GAPS model. I will elaborate on this a little bit more on the following slides. Phase 2 was quantitative in nature. It was more empirical research, which produced the so-called SERQUAL scale. And then phase 3 was once again qualitative, but it also had a qualitative component. And this one, the basic purpose of this phase was to understand the causes of the different gaps in the GAPS model and link them empirically to the gap 5. I will elaborate a little bit on this. Phase 4, once again, was purely qualitative research, and this produced the notion of zone of tolerance, which had to do with customers' expectations. And then finally, phase 5 was once again quantitative. The quantitative phase 5, produced a more refined circle approach that actually incorporated this whole idea of the zone of tolerance of customers' expectations into service quality measurement. So this is kind of like 30,000 feet sort of overview of the 5 major phases of this programmatic research on service quality. And one aspect that I would also like to emphasize at this juncture is that the 5 major phases, which you kind of see, the outcomes of which you see on the left-hand side of this chart, excuse me, let me go back. On the left-hand side of this chart, each of these 5 phases had multiple companies that sponsored that particular phase and also supported our research. Again, I'm not going to go through all of these companies. I'm sure you can recognize several of them, like Visa, the Travelers Insurance, Marriott, IBM. I mean, these are all worldwide companies, AT&T, and so forth. So the point I want to make here is that each of these major phases of the 15-year research journey had involvement from multiple sectors, multiple industries, and multiple companies. And this is very, very important, and I will emphasize the importance of this further towards the end of my presentation. It's something for you to just note at this stage. Okay. So the first phase, let me just elaborate on each of the 5 phases. The first phase, as I said, produced this conceptual framework that we are calling a GAPS model of service quality. And this was qualitative in nature, qualitative in the sense that to understand the customer side of service quality, we conducted a series of customer focus group interviews. All of you, I'm sure, are familiar with focus group interviews. So we conducted, 3 or 4 different focus group interviews in each of like 5 or 6 different sectors. You saw some of the companies that sponsored the first phase on the previous slide. So we had like about 25, 26 different focus group interviews that we conducted across different sectors such as appliance repair and maintenance services. These are services that are associated with a product. We looked at banking services. We looked at credit card services. We looked at hotel services. So we looked at a number of different services. And in these focus group interviews, we tried to probe with customers, discuss with customers how they would define quality of service, how they would assess and measure quality of service in their minds. So those were some of the questions that we asked, and we got a lot of very, very rich qualitative information. And based on that, we developed some ideas about quality of service as viewed by customers. And of course, one of the biggest revelations, if you want to call it that, out of that set of focus group interviews was that when customers evaluate quality of service, they evaluate quality of service by comparing the expectations that they have for the service. And by expectations here, the customers were really referring to what they would expect to get from a truly excellent service provider or truly excellent service company within a given sector. So the expectations relate to the industry level expectations that customers have in terms of what an excellent service should look like in that particular sector. With that, they compare their service perceptions, and service perceptions, of course, is the actual service that they perceive that they are receiving, and the gap between the two. And typically, there is a shortfall of what customers expect, ideally, and what they actually get from a given company, and that's what we are calling gap 5. And the gap 5 on the service organization side the qualitative research that we did consisted of in-depth interview. Whereas on the customer side, we did a series of focus group interviews. On the company side, we did a series of in-depth interviews of senior managers in companies to try to understand their perceptions of quality of service, what they thought, good quality service was, and what are some of the problems they faced in delivering high quality service. And what we found is that on the organization side, there are several major gaps that seem to cut across different companies. And again, keep in mind that we looked at multiple companies in this phase of our research. But even though the specific examples, specific responses that the managers gave us were all very pertinent to their particular industry and their particular company, when you step back, the patterns of responses that we were getting from the managers were all very, very similar. And based on those patterns, we came up with 4 major internal organizational gaps or organizational deficiency, which we are labeling gaps 1, 2, 3, and 4. So market information gap, service standards gap, service performance gap, and customer internal communication gap. I won't go into the details of these gaps, but again, many of you have seen the gaps model, but I would just like to say that this all seems very, very logical now, right? So market information gap, for example, has to do with a disconnect between what customers really want in terms of their expectations and what the organization actually understands. There are major disconnects, even to this day. There are major disconnects between what customers really want and what companies think customers want. So like that, you can logically go through this model and come up with these different gaps. So the main conceptual framework here, the managerial message of this conceptual model is that to truly improve quality of service externally, which is gap 5, companies need to work hard to improve or to close gaps 1, 2, 3, and 4. So in other words, unless gaps 1, 2, 3, and 4 are closed within the company, gap 5 externally cannot be closed. And again, if you just look at this overall model, it's a fairly simple, it's a very intuitive type of model, right? It's not rocket science. And again, this is again another point that I would like to make at the outset, which is that a lot of times, impactful research doesn't necessarily have to produce earth-shattering types of models. In fact, I would argue for the opposite, which is to say that good quality research, should always produce outcomes that are almost intuitive, but organized in a very logical fashion, because those are the kinds of things that are likely to be highly impactful in terms of influencing the stakeholders that they are intended to impact. In this case, when managers, by the way, one of the protocols that we followed in interacting with the Marketing Science Institute, remember, the Marketing Science Institute was the sponsor of all of our studies. So one of the main things that the Marketing Science Institute requires is that after completing an MSI-sponsored research project, we are obligated to go back to the companies that sponsored the research and present our results. So when we initially presented the GAPS model to groups of managers in these companies, their eyes all kind of, opened up wide, and they said, wow, this makes a lot of sense. This really makes a lot of sense. We can identify in our company each of these gaps. So there's a lot of excitement and enthusiasm. So the point I want to make here is that, good research done systematically need not necessarily end up with very complicated, statistical results or complicated pictures. It can result in very simple pictures, but very powerful pictures if properly put together and properly communicated to managers. So that was one of the major strengths of this initial GAPS model. The GAPS model from a research perspective, from a researcher perspective, also served as the foundation for subsequent phases of the research. In fact, for phase 2, which is on the next slide, we as researchers, as part of the research team, said, what should we do next now that we have the GAPS model? We said then to ourselves, let's focus not on the full GAPS model, but let's just focus on the customer side. Let's just look at the conceptual definition of service quality as this gap between customers' expectations and perceptions. Then try to see, how do we operationalize this? How do we measure this? So that's what produced this CirQual instrument. So the CirQual instrument, was derived from a quantitative phase, as you see at the top. It's a quantitative research, a lot of empirical studies that we did. From our focus group interviews that we did in phase 1 with customers, we identified a number of attributes on which customers make this expectation with perceptions comparison, very, very specific attributes. So we used those specific attributes as a starting point for developing a questionnaire to measure, to actually quantify quality of service. That's how the CirQual measure was constructed. We went through a lot of statistical analyses and so forth. There are multiple papers on CirQual, so I won't go through all the details. But as those of you that are familiar with my work know, the CirQual instrument consists of these 5 major categories or 5 major dimensions of quality of service: tangibles, reliability, responsiveness, assurance, and empathy. And on each of these 5 attributes, there are multiple questions. There are about 4 or 5 questions in the CirQual approach to measure customers' expectations and their perceptions. And another thing that we also incorporated in the CirQual measurement is to measure not only just the gap between expectation and perceptions, but also measure the relative importance of the 5 major dimensions themselves, again, through the eyes of the customer. We did that by asking customers to allocate a total of 100 points across the 5 dimensions: reliability, responsiveness, assurance, empathy, and tangibles. And as you see here, in study after study that we did using CirQual, we found roughly the same distribution of points. As you can see, reliability is the most important dimension with almost like a third of the allocation, and tangibles consistently came out last with about 10 to 12% of the allocation across, once again, across different studies. Now, when we actually compared the relative importance of the dimensions with the actual gap on this particular chart, on the vertical axis, you have the gap 5 score. The gap 5 is the perception minus expectation score, the P minus E score. So if P minus E is 0, that means customer expectations and perceptions exactly match. When the scores are positive, you have perceptions exceeding expectations. When the scores are negative, you have perceptions falling short of expectations. Now, as they say, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So when you see this picture, which is kind of an overall summary of the gaps, these are actual results that we did in the second phase of our research. So we see that on a dimension that is least important, which is tangibles, as we saw in the pie chart and in the previous slide, the companies that we are looking at were on average doing much better. Whereas on the 4 dimensions, which are much more important, including reliability, which was the most important dimension, the gap was much more negative, and also the widest gap, in fact, was on the most important dimension. So this again, when we went and presented back to managers, was a big eye opener for them to say that, we are focusing a lot of attention on unimportant things, not things that are not very important to customers, and we are obviously ignoring those areas that are critical. So once again, boiling down all of those statistical analyses and so forth to a couple of simple pictures was very powerful in creating a major impact on managerial thinking. Then the phase 3, as I mentioned in the overview chart, consisted of both a qualitative component and a quantitative component. Again, to give you just a very quick overview of this phase, when we got to phase 3, we had already completed like 6 years worth of our programmatic research. So in fact, we had the GAPS model, which you see in the middle here, GAPS 1 through 4 and GAP 5. And then we already had the Cirqual instrument developed. So we had pretty much about the right-hand side of this model already in place. So what was missing was, why do these gaps occur internally? Gaps 1, 2, 3, and 4. So the qualitative part of this phase 3 focused on trying to do an in-depth literature review of the organizational behavior literature, the human resource management literature, the technology literature, and so forth, trying to understand what could be some potential organizational causes for why these gaps occur, gaps 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then we also did some additional qualitative research by doing more in-depth interviews with companies, a lot of field work within companies, trying to understand why these gaps occur. So based on this research, qualitative research, we identified a long list, we identified a long list of factors that are potential causes of gaps 1, 2, 3, and 4. Potential causes of gaps 1, 2, 3, and 4. So that's what is shown on the leftmost side of this chart. So we, in a sense, we created a so-called extended gaps model by expanding the left-hand side of the model, so to speak. Come up with these set of factors. And there are a couple of publications that, in one of them appeared in Journal of Marketing, called Communication and Control Processes in Service Quality Delivery, that actually talks in detail about these different factors. But the main idea here is that these gaps 1 through 4, are there in many organizations, but the key drivers of those gaps might be much more specific within organizations, and they may actually also vary from one organization to another organization. So that was the main contribution of the qualitative part of this research. Now, it also, this particular phase of the research also had a quantitative component, and the quantitative component had to do with doing an overall empirical test of this entire extended gaps model by using structural equation modeling, SEM, which many researchers even to this day are very enamored with. So we collected a lot of data using Cirqual on the right-hand side, and then we created questionnaires actually to measure all of the potential causes of the gaps, as well as gaps 1 through 4 on the left-hand side of this chart. And then so we had loads and loads of data, quantitative data. So we tried to put it all into a structural equation model. In other words, convert this picture into an SEM, structural equation model. And we did statistical analysis to see what is the fit. And so if you're curious about what was the fit, I would say that we didn't get a very good fit at all. In fact, our structural equation model we couldn't explain much of the variance at all. Now, if I have time at the end, I can get into this in a little bit more detail. But the point I'm trying to make here is that sometimes, as researchers, we get carried away with the success of our own research, because by the time we got to this phase, the gaps model and cirqual were already being cited over and over again. People are getting interested, and they were citing the research. So we got carried away. We said, okay, let's push this, some more. Let's do more quantitative studies. So we were very eager to show that this overall model had excellent empirically speaking. But testing a model like this is not easy from an empirical sense.
Yes.
Because the right-hand side of the model, all the data has to come from consumers. For the left-hand side of the model, all the data have to come from companies. So to properly test this kind of a model, empirically speaking, we need to actually have a sample of companies, not just a sample of customers. To do an SEM, for example, those of you that have used SEM, structural equation modeling, to properly statistically test a structural equation model, you need at least like 200 data points or 200 samples. These are not samples of customers, but you need to have like 200 companies. And the 200 companies, then each of those companies, you'll have to measure all of these internal gaps. And then for the 200 companies, you have to have data from external customers of those companies. So it's a humongous project. In fact, practically, it's impossible to do it. So we were aware of it at that stage. But so how did we sort of get around this? We, at this phase of our research, the MSI, the Marketing Science Institute, gave us 5 companies actually as sponsors of the project. So we didn't have 200 companies, we only had 5 companies. But all of these companies were global companies. They had multiple divisions. They had what they called SBUs, strategic business units. So we treated SBUs within a company as a data point or as a sample unit. So across the 5 companies, we had about, from each company, we had about 40 or so SBUs. So in total, we had like 200 sample size, which for statistical purposes was okay. But the problem is when you have SBUs within the same company, they all at least share the same organizational culture. And this is an important point because when you look at the left-hand side of the model, poor upward communication, poor technology job fit, poor horizontal communication, and so on, most of those are organizational culture-related types of issues, right?
Yes.
So if you have, if you look at SBUs from the same company, you get very little variance in your data because they're all coming from the same mothership, so to speak. So that was the problem. So to properly do a structural equation model, you need to have a robust set of data. What do we mean by robust set of data? You need to have data that has true variance in it. And if there is not good variance in all of the variables on the left-hand side, there's no way you can statistically test a model like this. So I would say, having done, a lot of different research studies of the 5 major phases, which is the focus of my talk today, I would say this particular phase was the most disappointing in terms of the empirical, in terms of the quantitative part. In terms of the qualitative part, it again made a big contribution because again, it conceptually expanded the gaps model. But in terms of the empirical assessment, it was a very disappointing type of study. But post hoc, I can see why. So we did learn some lessons from this. So as again, some of you might be aware, as soon as the gaps model and cirqual, particularly when cirqual was published, in 1988. This is the first article on CERQUAL came up. There was also a lot of criticism of CERQUAL, right? So
Yeah.
the people started writing articles criticizing criticizing in the sense that, you know, there was a number of articles that appeared of the following form. They'd say, okay, we took the CERQUAL instrument and we applied it to this particular setting, this particular bank or this particular company, and then we conducted a factor analysis of the data that we collected, and we didn't get 5 dimensions. We actually got 7 dimensions because
Mm.
our factor analysis showed 7. Or somebody will say we only got 3 dimensions. So this is one type of thing that somehow CERQUAL is not stable was really one of the criticisms. And then the other, I'm oversimplifying things a little bit here, but I do want to make some points. So that's why I'm saying this. So that was one type of criticism, that the number of dimensions, doesn't seem to be consistent. The other type of criticism, again, to simplify matters, was basically of the form that, do we really need to measure expectations? Or can we measure quality of service simply by measuring perceptions? In other words, why do you have to measure expectations? Because if you're asking customers, what are your expectations, they're always going to give high values. Nobody is going to say, okay, I'd like to have a low expectation, right? So why even measure expectations was another criticism. This latter criticism is actually something that sowed the seeds, so to speak, for this phase 4. In other words, phase 4 focused on, as you see on the title here, nature and determinants of customer service expectations. So we said, as researchers, again, the PCB team, the 3 of us said, okay, so we're getting all these criticisms, so why don't we undertake another qualitative research? Because up to this stage, we've done a lot of quantitative studies, so let's do qualitative research. Let's do qualitative research to try and understand what exactly do we mean by customers' expectations? What is the nature or structure of those expectations? And what are the determinants of those expectations? So we launched, once again, a series of focus group interviews, again, in multiple sectors, trying to understand not the definition of quality of service, but the nature, the structure, the overall structure, and the determinants of customer service expectations. And that's what produced this notion of zone of tolerance. And again, this is a very simple notion, basically stating that when customers think about their expectations, sometimes these expectations are implicit in their minds. When they think about expectations, they are really thinking about they are thinking about a range of expectations rather than just an ideal level of expectations, which is what we did with the previous CERQUAL approach. The CERQUAL approach, we defined expectations as excellence, what you would ideally like to get from a company. Whereas in this additional research, qualitative research, showed that most customers really have a range of expectations rather than a single ideal point. They do have a high level of expectation, which is what in the zone of tolerance, which is the upper boundary of the zone of tolerance, which you're calling desired level of service that customers can, level of service that customers believe can and should be delivered. So the desired service level is almost like a realistic ideal. And the lower boundary of the zone of tolerance is what we are calling adequate service, which is the minimum level of service that customers are willing to accept. So this zone of tolerance notion was again an eye-opener for us. And when we shared this finding with executives, for them as well, for executives as well, because they were able to clearly see that we need to not understand just what customers ideally want. We need to understand what is the range. What is the range, or what is the size of their zone of tolerance? Because as a company, if you look at it from the company's viewpoint, then as a company, you'd want to deliver a level of service that is at least within the zone of tolerance, right? So if you deliver a level of service that is within the zone of tolerance, then your customers are going to be reasonably satisfied. they're going to be really upset if the level of service is below the adequate level at the minimum level. And of course, if you've managed to deliver a level of service that is beyond the desired service, they probably will be delighted. So this again is something that is very, very simple in terms of what the result was, but very, very powerful in terms of telling companies and managers uh, how they can improve quality of service and what they really need to do to truly satisfy customers, service customers, right? So in addition to the zone of tolerance, we also have, we identified a number of factors or determinants that could influence both the desired service and the adequate service. There was a paper that was published in JAMS, the Journal of the Academy of Marketing Science, that presents the full model, expectations model, with the different determinants of these things. But for our purposes, I'm just showing you the zone of tolerance in a very simplified way. But there is, there are papers available that discuss both of these levels of service in much greater detail, including what are potential determinants of those different levels. Now, finally, phase 5 was quantitative, and we took the original CERQUAL instrument and we refined it through a series of quantitative studies to operationalize and incorporate the zone of tolerance into the gap measurement. In fact, we were able to actually create measures of the desired level of service, the adequate or minimum level of service, the lower boundary, and the actual perceived level of service for the same CERQUAL attributes. So the CERQUAL attributes, the 22 or so attributes that we initially started out with, they remain fairly the same. But we actually created a questionnaire where we could measure desired service level, minimum service level, and the perceived service level for the same set of attributes, so that we could actually construct the zone of tolerance for the different dimensions. So this is and again, we had multiple companies participate in this phase of our research. I just want to share results from one of those companies, which is a computer manufacturer. By the way, computer manufacturer in this particular study was IBM. It was a B2B study. IBM, we did a study for IBM by surveying about 200 business customers of IBM. We measured the desired service level, the minimum service level, and the perceived service level for each of the 5 dimensions. By each of the 5 dimensions, I mean for each specific facets, and then we combined the measures for the specific facets under each of the 5 dimensions to come up with this overall picture. So the yellow rectangle here is the actual zone of tolerance. By the way, we also increased our scale from, the previous CERQUAL, the original CERQUAL had a scale of 1 to 7. We expanded that to a scale of 1 to 9 because now we are measuring 2 different levels of expectation. So again, there's a lot of literature talking about, how we tested this instrument and the different versions of it that we tested and so forth. I'm not getting into all of that for our purposes today, but we did change the structure of the questionnaire, and we did change the rating scale from a 7-point scale to a 9-point scale. So as you can see here, these are actual results. If you're IBM manager looking at this picture, you're probably going to tell yourself, we as a company, overall, we seem to be doing okay, right? Okay, in the sense that you're at least within the zone of tolerance on all 5 attributes. The red dot here in each of these rectangles is the service quality perception. Service quality perception is the red dot. So as you can see, on tangibles, you're actually slightly exceeding the desired level of service. And on the other 4, you're within the zone of tolerance, although you're barely above the minimum level. So overall, it seems to be okay. Now, relating to the criticism in the academic literature about why do you need to measure expectations, this kind of picture was also very helpful to us to be able to respond to those criticisms. For example, in this particular study, if we had not measured customer expectations at all, what will this picture look like? So we will just have in the picture the red dots, right?
Mm.
So if you only measured perceptions, this is what we will have, right?
Yes.
This is what we'll have.
Yes.
Yeah, so if you look at this as a set of IBM managers, you would say, wow, this is great. On a scale of 1 to 9, we are uniformly right around 7.5 to 8, which is a very
Yes.
good score, I would say. So from a
Very good.
practical standpoint, but then when you superimpose the zone of tolerance, your picture and your interpretation completely changes. So managerially, we were able to show through a simple picture like this, we were able to show that you really need to measure, at least you need to have a good understanding of what the range of expectations of customers are, because understanding what the range of expectations are will give you as a company a benchmark against which you should try to sort of overlay your actual delivered service. Otherwise, if you just look at what customers think of your service, then you're likely to get a picture like this. The dots haven't really changed in the two pictures. The only thing that I've changed here is to superimpose a zone of tolerance. So this was a very new revelation, and we also use this to kind of defend against some of the criticism in the literature as well. Again, there are articles that we have written in response to the criticisms of CircWall, so we used some of this in responding to our critiques as well. See, okay, so now that I've given you an overview of the 5 major phases, why we did what we did and what we found and so forth, let me switch slightly to looking at the impact, the overall impact of this PCB research stream in terms of the pedagogy or teaching impact, academic impact in terms of sponsoring more research or spurring more research, and also practitioner impact.
Yes.
So in terms of pedagogical impact, there have been a number of textbooks and other books that have been based on the GAPS model. Some, not all of these have been written by us. Several of these have been written by us, the PCB team, and the books have been but others have been written by others. And some of these have been translated into multiple languages and so forth. So pedagogy-wise, there has been some a good degree of impact. In terms of academic impact and publication impact, another thing that I would like to point out here is that as part of the protocol for doing research through MSI, at the conclusion of each research project, we are supposed to submit a paper for MSI, and MSI, if they think the paper is good, they will publish it as a monograph. Okay. There is an MSI monograph series. So you can see here a series of monographs that have emerged. Now, some of these go beyond the 1994, but I'm showing this to show again the programmatic research. If you remember one of the earlier tree diagrams that I showed, my research didn't stop in 1994, which is the 15-year stretch here. But it continued beyond the 1994 into the eCircWall part as well. So Valerie Zeitamel and myself continued to do work on that. So there's several other MSI monographs as well that emerged. So the most important thing that I want to point out here is that if you look at the chronology of these monographs, you will see the monographs also alternate between qualitative or conceptual articles and empirical articles. So the yellow shaded ones are conceptual articles, and the gold or dark yellow shaded ones are empirical articles. So what's my point? And by the way, each of these monographs have turned into at least one, in several cases, multiple publications in other journals. So most of these, in fact, virtually all of these have ended up in journals as well, in different forms. But the point I want to make here is that mirroring the progression of our different phases of research, the monographs have also alternated between conceptual pieces and empirical pieces. The reason I'm emphasizing this, especially for emerging researchers, there seems to be a bias against, at least I sense, a bias against conceptual research and a bias towards empirical research.
Yes.
Right. I've had doctoral students come up to me and say, sir, should I even work on this? It seems all conceptual. The advice I always give is, go for it. Conceptual work, in fact, can be a lot more impactful than empirical research. Not to say that empirical research is bad, but somehow, I think many doctoral students, as well as young scholars, they get enamored, they get misguided in some ways by professors into saying that you need to do an SEM or you need to do a factor analysis. That, in my opinion, that's the wrong approach to take. I think the type of problems you're addressing should discuss the type of research you should do.
Yes.
Not the tail shouldn't wag the dog, so to speak. Right? So I want to show here that over a period of almost 20 years, which is what is captured in this slide, the major publications, at least through the eyes of MSI, they've alternated between qualitative and quantitative, because good qualitative research can really show the foundation, lay the foundation for a series of empirical studies to follow. So you can actually develop a research stream. So I think it's quite all right, in fact, encouraged to alternate between qualitative and quantitative research. So in terms of academic impact, there are multiple ways of measuring academic impact. In this slide and the next one, I've just pulled down the Google Scholar citation statistics for some of the publications. You can see here the GAPS model as of last month had close to 34,500 citations. This delivering quality service is actually a practitioner-oriented book. A book aimed at practice, not a textbook, but a book aimed at practitioners. And that has also garnered close to 8,600, 8,700 citations in academic journals.
Wow.
And here are some other articles in the research stream. And then if you look at CircWall, the previous slide was for GAPS model, CircWall and other more empirical paper related citations. You can see CircWall has almost 38,000 citations, or approaching 38,000. And there are a number of other articles. All of them are empirical articles that have a fair number of citations as well. So both qualitative research as well as quantitative research can have deep academic impact if, number one, they are focused on an important topic that has practical relevance, and second, if they are done rigorously, they are done with a fair amount of rigor, academic rigor. In terms of practitioner impact, here are multiple companies that have all used CircWall and/or the GAPS model in some way. There are dozens of companies that are using at least some of these findings and some of these frameworks. Now, here we see a set of companies in which I personally consulted with. Either done seminars for executives or actually worked on projects in their companies by drawing upon the GAPS model and CircWall. In terms of international impact, here are countries to which I've gone personally to make presentations both to academic audiences as well as to companies. And I've worked with some companies as well in some of these countries. So I believe this is my last slide. So let me just take a couple of minutes to go through this, and then we can have a discussion.
Sure,
So what are some of the major lessons that I've learned? First of all, you need to choose a domain or a topic that has evolutionary potential, even if it is risky. What I mean by evolutionary potential is, you should not be afraid to get into an area in which not much has been done, which is exactly what service quality domain was in the early 1980s. There was nothing, no work. There's a lot of work on quality, but all of that, as I mentioned at the outset, focused on product quality, the quality of goods.
Yes.
Whereas, there was very little, in fact, zero on quality of service. And it was a kind of a risky type of topic to take on because there's not much prior history. But then that again could be a benefit. It depends on which side of the coin you're looking at.
Yes.
So if there's a risky domain, don't be afraid to jump into it. But attack it with the right type of approach, right mindset, and sometimes you also have to be persistent. And once you establish a name for yourself, it's a lot easier to establish a name in an area that is not studied well at all than to establish an area, name in an area where there are, area that is well established, where there are a lot of scholars already made a lot of contributions, right?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
that's the trade-off that need to think about. It's just some food for thought. Choose research colleagues with colleagues with similar core values but complementary skills. Now, again, going back to the PZB team, we each of the three of us brought different things to the table. For example, given my quantitative and engineering training, I was more like the modeling person. I came up with the models, I came up with the pictures and everything else. Valerie, was deeply rooted in consumer behavior. In fact, she has done seminal work in the area of price, value, quality relationships. So her dissertation was on the topic in deeply consumer behavior type of area, whereas my dissertation was in a very, very quantitative area. And then Len Berry is kind of like the practitioner of the group, so to speak. He had done a lot of work in the area of relationship marketing. He was already heavily involved in financial services, as I mentioned at the outset. But all three of us had common core values. We were all working very hard, want to do high quality research, high impactful research. So we had similar core values, but we had complementary skills, not the same skills. Again, I'm emphasizing this because oftentimes there's a tendency, especially among younger scholars, to start working with other scholars who look just like them. So sometimes that might be counterproductive. So try to counterproductive in the sense that you may not be getting as much mileage, so to speak, for all the effort that you're putting into it, as you would if different authors, different co-authors bring different things to the table. Conduct your research in multiple sectors and contexts. And again, as I said in one of the earlier slides, each of the phases of our research has focused on multiple sectors. Now, this is important from two perspectives. From two perspectives. I would say that it's important, first of all, because it makes your results more robust. In the sense that results can be generalizable. And secondly, in terms of publications, it kind of preemptively handles some of the potential criticisms. Because what I mean by that is that sometimes when you do research in one bank or one particular setting, reviewers typically might come back with saying that, oh, you did this in this particular bank or in this particular geographic region. So, what would the results really hold when you went to some other bank or some other area? I'm just making this up, but those are the kinds of criticisms that you get from reviewers. So by proactively doing it in multiple settings and showing that the results are similar, you're kind of nipping the potential criticism in the bud, so to speak. So you've already tested it in multiple. You may not be able to do it in all sectors, but at least do it in a few contexts so that to establish the generalizability and the robustness of your research. Be realistic. Don't bite off more than you could chew. This is important. Here, I would like to go back to phase 3. Remember, phase 3 had a qualitative component that produced the extended gaps model, and it had a quantitative component that, as I said, was not successful at all, so to speak. It was one of the most disappointing parts of my research journey. And that primarily happened because we got overambitious, and we said, okay, now that we have this expanded gaps model, so let's go ahead and test the whole thing. And that didn't work out very well. Seek out reputable external agency that can serve as a catalyst for supporting and critiquing your work. In other words, before going out to publish a paper, at least get some other set of eyes, look at it and give you some feedback. That's the overall message I'm giving. In our case, the external agency was actually MSI. Every time we did a piece of research, we went back to MSI, presented our results to managers, and got some very good feedback as well, which in turn helped us write our papers in a better fashion. But it doesn't always have to be an external agency in terms of an organization. It could be your peers. It could be, so you need to do that. And then disseminate your findings through different types of publication outlets and forums to reach diverse audiences. In other words, don't try to go after the same type of publication outlet. It's very, very, especially for young scholars, it's very, very important to aim for the A-level journals and establish your credibility and your name in A-level journals. But then as you start progressing in your career, you can, also write more practitioner-oriented articles for other types of audiences. You can write books down the road. Don't write books initially, but write books later on in your career. So you can use multiple ways of disseminating the knowledge that you're creating. Last but not least, work hard, be patient, and be prepared to face and respond constructively to criticisms of your work. So, good quality work will invite criticism, just like Cirqual did. So you will get criticisms, but then view those criticisms constructively. You need to view them constructively and then try to get a little bit better. In fact, I would say that in our work, in the PCB stream, I'm really happy based on hindsight that we got all those criticisms, because if there were no criticisms of Cirqual, we may not have done some of those subsequent studies. So criticism can actually be a plus if you viewed it with the proper perspective. So with that, let me stop. I'm sorry that I kind of exceeded my time here, but Kashif, over to you now.
Sir, thank you very much. Pleasure listening to you. Before I take up some questions from the audience, I would like to conclude some of the observations that I have during the presentation. For example, I noticed that, and you can make corrections, sir. For example, I noticed that from the beginning, you were focusing on industrial problems and you were focusing on some industry-led issues like service quality. And you mentioned that a lot of companies, service companies, they were facing some issues with respect to service quality. So that became the hallmark of your research. This is where you started from.
Right.
Then I also observed that you were into a sort of what we call today into methodological pluralism. You were not biased towards one method. You were not into qualitative only and you were not into quantitative only. Rather, you were nicely combining the two and you were, as needed, Your problem was driving the methods rather than you think of a method and then you observe a problem. Another thing which I noticed that you very intelligently you linked yourself with Marketing Science Institute, and they were the ones who provided funding to you and who also offered some managerial support. That because you are doing some industry-driven research, so they provided a platform where you, as a scholar, as a researcher, and as a theorist, and they were providing you the platform with the managers, with the peers, those who can offer you some advice and some suggestions and also listen to you carefully as what is going on next. It was like a close collaboration with the industry. And as you mentioned, another point which I observed that you were taking criticism very positively, which is quite uncommon these days. In fact, based on my understanding, people usually they are into sort of a love affair. They are quite myopic when it comes to their research, and they say that their study is like a divine thing and it cannot be challenged. And how dare that someone challenge their work? But I guess you took the criticism very positively, and also you were like getting yourself connecting with the criticism. Actually, you are not simply reading the criticism and just throwing it somewhere else. Rather, you were taking a heads-on assault with the criticism very positively, and you were like responding to them with the another research which you came up with. And then, as you mentioned, your research has an impact. Definitely, I would second, and I think all of us we have observed it that your research came up with an impact, and the multiple platforms that you use, Marketing Science Institute, then the conferences, then the books, then the publications in journals, maybe conference proceedings. So all these facets make up this excellent journey. Sir, would you like to say something else? The way I concluded your session so far?
No, Kashif, you've done a wonderful job. I think I couldn't have said it better. So those are, really a good summary of the lessons that I had touched on. So absolutely. So I think those are, very good takeaways that that every doctoral student and young emerging scholar should take away as well. Yeah, well done.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Now, there are a few questions, if you allow me, I would like to ask,
Sure.
and those questions probably can benefit the larger audiences. Sir, my questions might be very simple because those might be coming from the brain of an undergraduate student who is interested in research or someone who is a young doctoral candidate interested in research. Sir, as you rightly mentioned that a lot of PhD students come to you and they say that they are interested in conceptual thing, but they don't want to do this conceptual thing. Someone might be coming up with and say that they are interested into qualitative investigation, thus they are methodologically biased. My question to you is that how can a scholar think of research ideas? What is the source of a research idea according to you? I mean, you gave example of GAPS model and serve goal, but where from ideas actually come from? Is it like that you are like most of the cases when we are a teaching based school here, sir, and most of the times the managers are sipping a coffee at the start of the case summary narrates this way that Mr. X or Mr. Y is sipping a cup of coffee and looking outside the window and thinking of the future of the organization. So is it like sipping a cup of coffee where the ideas come from, or doing some jogging, or where from these ideas come from? If you would like to elaborate on it.
Very excellent question. I wish ideas came that easily, particularly from a research standpoint. Sometimes there are geniuses that get those ideas and then they, or idea for a story or something. Yes. But when you're doing academic research, you need to also kind of till the ground, so to speak, so that you can sow the seeds, so the ideas can start germinating. What do I mean by till the field? First and foremost, be aware of the literature. I mean, do a lot of reading. Do a lot of reading, not just the academic literature, but find out what's going on out in the field, out in the world. Sometimes, and then that's a lot of hard work. It takes time. And then as in my case, again, if I might go back to the origins of my research program, I did not do dissertation in the area of services at all. My dissertation was, as I said, in the Salesforce management area. ultimately allocating salespeople to sales territories. Now, why did I think of that for my dissertation? I thought of that once again because I went to the literature. I come from an engineering background, so I
Yes.
had a pretty strong, and then even in my PhD program, I had, statistics and operations research as my minor areas. Marketing was my major area. So I wanted to do something in marketing, and marketing is usually kind of looked down upon
Mm.
by other disciplines like accounting, finance. They say, okay, they are somehow more quantitative. They are somehow more black and white. Marketing, you just BS your way through. You just do some advertisement, some stuff. So they don't fully understand, the criticisms. But in my case, I wanted to sort of marry the two. That's how my dissertation. Let me
Mm.
talk about, nothing to do with service quality, but my dissertation, I said I want to do something in an area where companies are looking for advice, but where I can use my quantitative skills to create something new, some kind of a new modeler. So the Salesforce area, attracted me because first of all, there are only like 20 articles that I could identify that had to do with how to assign salespeople to sales territories. Only
Mm.
about 20 articles in this. I'm talking about 1972. So now
Right.
there are volumes of articles. So that was, I said, okay, let me look into that. Then I read those articles. Some of them were very highly quantitative. So then what I found was that one thing that they were not doing properly, some probably missing out, is that they are assuming that all salespeople are equal. So what they'll
Mm.
say is, even 40 salespeople and 50 territories, how do you juggle them? So they'll come up with mathematical models to do that. I said, okay, that's good, but what if salesperson A is different from salesperson B? And what if territory
Mm.
X is different from territory Y? And what about the fit of the salesperson to the territory? So that was the little spark,
Mm.
that idea. Then I said, okay, maybe I can come up with a set of salesperson characteristics, and maybe I can come up with a set of territory characteristics or customer character, whatever, and then see if somehow into the modeling that has already been done, incorporate this additional sort of wrinkle, so to speak. So that's how my idea developed. It's a lot of work.
Yeah.
In fact, during the first year of my doctoral program, I did a lot of reading, and I tested some of these ideas in the actual doctoral seminars I was taking. So the papers that I wrote
Mm.
for the seminar courses were all focused on testing bits and pieces of my ideas. Okay, salespeople have these characteristics, territories have this. How do we model that, jointly? At the same time, also fit that into the optimization models that have already been developed. So again, my dissertation turned out to be very quantitative modeling, but it had this additional wrinkle that had been ignored.
Mm.
So always, and that gave me a lot of confidence. It turned out to be a good dissertation. In fact, some companies even bought my dissertation because they liked some of the things I was saying in the dissertation. So which gave me confidence. I said, okay, so whatever I do from now on, I need to be more practitioner focused, find
Mm.
out, what's the reality, and then use our academic training and my academic training. I'm talking to scholars now. Generally speaking, look at, who's your external stakeholder, who would you like to impact, whether it's public policy officials or, practicing managers or other scholars, really doesn't matter. Who are your external stakeholders? And what is it that you bring to the table? What are your strengths? Do a lot of self-examination,
Mm.
go through the literature, not just the academic literature, but also the business literature, and then see where are some of the gaps.
Mm.
And then
Mm.
I think you will definitely come up with the ideas that will fit your training and your strengths, and at the same time, likely to be potentially valuable. So it is a lot of hard work. Certainly
Yes.
doesn't come up, you don't come up with an idea sipping a cup of coffee, at least in the kind of work that we do. It takes some work, but it can be channeled work. So again, this is part of programmatic thinking itself. In
Yes.
my view, programmatic research also always has to should view research more as a journey rather than as something that you hit upon. I've hit upon this. I'm going to do a paper on this, and that's it. So you have to be constantly thinking about this as a journey rather than simply a point in time.
Right, sir. Fantastic, sir. Fantastic, sir. So my next question is related to theory building and theory and the context. In fact, there are there are a number of theories available right now. So a lot of theories, just to name, a lot of theories there are there. And they mostly in our part of the world, people say that because those are developed in the Western settings, those can't be replicated, and those theories do not represent this part of the world. What is your take on that? Can we say that theories have a context and theories have a nationality? Can we say like that? Or theory is for everyone? Or there is a need to some contextually replicate the theory? Or maybe if I talk about, let's say, in the field of service quality, you may have came across a lot of models, HervCool and ParkServe. ParkServe in specific, you may have seen a lot of publications. Dr. Nasir Rajput, he in fact said that there should be a different cultural paradigm in order to conceptualize the service quality. So what is your take on that? I mean, how important it is to contextualize a theory, according to your opinion, sir?
Okay, very, very good question. Very good question. My own view is that a good theory, in addition to immediately impacting practice, should also sow the seeds for other kinds of theoretical frameworks. So it should, ParkServe is a good example. So if somebody is coming and saying that, okay, here's a SERQUAL theory, we need a different theory, they're not really coming up with a different theory. They're coming up with nuances that are different. So the starting point is still SERQUAL, right?
Yes.
So they're modifying it, which is fine, which a good theory should in fact foster that. In fact, I would say that in marketing, we always are apologizing in some ways by saying that, we borrow from psychology, we borrow from sociology, we borrow from, some other domains. So we really don't have any marketing theories. You always come up with, my theoretical foundation is stimulus response theory. My theoretical foundation, even especially doctoral students and younger scholars have the tendency of saying, okay, we need to cite a theory. But I would say that, there's a lot of opportunity for us to develop our own theories. I don't think the GAPS model is a theory, but if you almost can call it that because there's nothing else. So you can call it theory. I wouldn't call it a theory. I would call it more like a framework, but you can call it that. But that has spawned a lot of other kinds of research. And SERQUAL similarly. In fact, there's another area called library science. Library science, I've worked with them closely, but they're in a separate discipline. Library science is a separate discipline than marketing. Now they've taken SERQUAL and they've developed something called LibQual, library quality.
Okay.
And they've changed some things, but they've really done a very good job. In fact, there is if you go to LibQual, they have a website, LibQual.
Oh, okay.
So it's amazing. I mean, they've done a lot of different things, and hundreds of libraries internationally are using that approach to assess quality of service. So, but the starting point for that was SERQUAL. In fact, I worked with them for 10 years, talking about SERQUAL, how we came up with it and so forth. And they took all of that and they said, okay, now we're going to construct our own framework. So marketing can actually produce, we as marketing scholars can produce our own theories. We may not call them theories, but if it's a good enough framework that we are developing, then others can and perhaps should take it. So modifying a theory to fit another context is definitely appropriate, in my opinion. In fact, and that's a credit to the original theory.
Yes. Very right. Fantastic, sir. Thank you. Probably the last question, because it's post midnight time already.
Yes. I'm sorry that I.
No. Just one more question. I'll not bother you much.
No. For me, that's not a problem, but the audience will make it a problem.
Yeah,
Been
yeah,
working.
no issues, no issues. Just one more thing, you see, these days, a lot of scholars, they are promoting interdisciplinary research. And as you rightly mentioned, a lot of knowledge in the field of marketing, HR, because characteristically, correct me, but these are the functional areas, not the theory itself. Marketing is a functional area, HR is a functional area, finance, operations, IT, these are the organizational functions that usually the managers perform. But when it comes to theory, the knowledge is either coming from strategy, war studies, sociology, psychology, probably from some pure sciences as well, some knowledge like brand cannibalism as an example, and so many others. So knowledge is in the field of marketing and in particular is coming from some other disciplines. So what is your take on this interdisciplinary research? How one should take, if you think one should take on, and how to move forward when it comes to theorizing with respect to interdisciplinary research?
Again, excellent question. I am a strong believer in interdisciplinary research. In fact, I would say that as a researcher over the years, particularly in the more recent years, late in my career, I have been strongly influenced by people from other disciplines.
Hmm.
In fact, one stream of research, which I did not touch on today, is the research that I've done with researchers in the information systems area. They actually introduced me to a lot of the latest technologies, latest concepts that the IS people are
Hmm.
working on. So that actually spawned a lot of ideas, and we took some ideas from Cirqual marketing, and
Yeah.
we've done some work together. I'm a firm believer in that. And in the area of service, there's an article that myself and some co-authors published in the area of service research priorities. Though any of you in the audience that are working on service issues, should read that article. It's a 2015 article in the Journal of Service Research on service research, moving the field forward. I don't remember the exact title. It's on service research priorities. Professor Amy Ostrom, Ostrom, is the first author on that. There are about 5 authors, and the authors are all from an interdisciplinary team.
Hmm.
That's
Hmm.
not because that's why I'm saying there are 5 authors, 5 of us. 2 of us are in marketing, one is in operations research, one is an HR person. So the team itself is like that. So it's a conceptual framework for different priority areas where there are topics you talked earlier about. How do you come up with ideas? That's another thing. Look also for articles that talk about what are the priorities, what are the
Hmm.
research priorities. So this will be a good thing for that. And in fact, it's a long article. It's a lot of detail there. But one of the concluding thoughts in that article is that we really need to have interdisciplinary research to truly move our field forward, because we cannot be talking about
Hmm.
services marketing or services
Yeah.
HR. I
Yeah.
mean, if you really want to push the boundaries of the field, research has to become interdisciplinary. In
Hmm.
fact, we even use the term and say it has to become transdisciplinary, we say, where we are saying, it's even beyond interdisciplinary, because interdisciplinary research, there's a whole section where we talk about that. That's why I'm glad you asked this question, because there's a whole section towards the end of the paper where we talk about, from discipline specific research to interdisciplinary research to
Yes.
transdisciplinary, meaning that we get rid of all of these marketing, HR, IS boundaries. Let's talk about,
Hmm.
because in reality, in many companies, it's already happening. The silos that still exist in our academic
Yeah.
discipline, in the marketing
Yes.
department, the finance department.
Yes.
Academic institutions don't change as rapidly as the outside world. The outside world, there are interdisciplinary teams working on problems from the get-go in terms of designing a new service, and the whole design thinking area is another one. You cannot have design thinking unless you have interdisciplinary teams. So I'm
Absolutely.
I'm an absolute believer in that, and I think that is the way to go to produce really robust and impactful research.
Absolutely. And just one little take again from your discussion, although there are a lot of things, but just one more take that academically, the business schools, they are into silos, you very rightly pointed out, because we have separate marketing faculty,
Right.
people who teach marketing only, and there are people who teach finance only, there are people who teach HR only. But when I was getting trained, I don't know if you will agree probably, when I was getting trained for a case-based pedagogy, they said that as a marketing professor, you should know how to crack a balance sheet, how to go about the horizontal vertical analysis of a balance sheet, how to move on with the strategic management sort of theories and their paradigms, and how to do some finance and how to do some operations. Otherwise, you cannot teach a comprehensive case. So, I
Yes.
mean, just taking inspiration for that, even, I guess there is a now need that if we wanted to promote interdisciplinary or you said transdisciplinary research, we need to have people with more open-mindedness and they are having multiple skills with them. Only then, I guess, my thought is that only then they can move forward with this interdisciplinary type of research. Otherwise, we'll be like fighting with our own self within the silo that we actually belong to. But that somehow is a reality of the business schools. Uh, so, sir, this is from our side. Thank you very much. It was truly a pleasure listening to you directly and an honor to interact with you, sir. I would again like to mention that I grew up academically reading your work, and you are an inspiration. It was truly a fantastic experience. Over to you, the host institution.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir, for giving such an enlightening presentation and for providing us insights on the topic. I'm sure everyone has gained a lot of knowledge and is left intrigued. I would also like to thank our session moderator, Mohammad Kashif, sir, for moderating smoothly and ensuring such a smooth session. Now I request everyone to kindly switch on their cameras for the virtual photograph. Thank you so much, everyone. I request Dr. Aati Seni ma'am, the Organizing Secretary, IECBM 2021, to present the formal vote of thanks.
Good morning, everyone, and good evening, Professor Parshuraman. And thank you so much on behalf of entire Department of Commerce of Shahid Bhagat Singh College, University of Delhi. I would like to thank you and our dear colleague, Professor Dr. Kashif, who joined us today to discuss on theorizing in business and management. With time, we have realized how important the theories are in research and not to forget the importance of circle model in service marketing. So Parshuraman sir nicely shared his academic journey and how the evolution of research domain and services happened, the birth of circle and the collaborations. The collaborations sometimes create history. And yes, we have seen this from circle model. The emphasis on the collaboration was also discussed by Professor J yesterday, and we all completely agree with it, sir. So with this note, I would like to thank Professor Parshuraman for sharing his journey and motivating researchers present here. My special thanks to our neighbor, Dr. Kashif, who is also brand ambassador for publishing, our academic partner for this conference, for joining us here. I would like to express my thanks to Dr. Meera Mehta, who is a session coordinator, along with my student team, who very nicely handled this session. We are privileged to have two distinguished professors of marketing over here, and thank you so much from my side. That's all. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. Once again, my sincere apologies for starting late. I appreciate your patience. Thank you.
Thank you so much,
Sir, thank you
everyone.
very much.
With this, we come to the end of today's discussion forum. I would like to thank each and every one of you for being such a cooperative and patient audience. We look forward to hosting you for the upcoming sessions. Thank you again.